On today's episode, which toughest was the toughest? With the 4 people who ran all 6 toughest mudders in 2017.
This is the world's toughest podcast. Welcome to the world's toughest podcast, where we talk about any obstacle course race you'd like, as long as that's world's toughest mudder. Each week we talk to members of the WTM community and share stories of success and failure in the single greatest event in OCR. My name is Will Hicks, and this is the world's toughest podcast. On today's episode, we are going to definitively answer the question, which toughest mudder was the toughest? I sit down with the 4 people who ran all 6 toughest mudders this year, and this is a true story. You will know which toughest mudder was the toughest mudder by the end of this episode. Spoiler alert, it's probably not what you think. I was surprised. The 4 people I talk with are Jim Campbell, Melissa Sharkbait Dugan, Mark James, and Sara Knight. If you listen to the podcast for a while, then you've heard each of them before on the podcast. But this is the first time they've come together like an OCR Voltron to sit down and talk with me. Before we talk to them, let's read some iTunes reviews. T-Nash321 writes, 5 stars. Long-time WTMer. Love it. Great advice and talk. Thank you, T-Nash321. I believe that is Tyler Nash, he of the 50 miles at Toughest Mudder Chicago, that is planning on running 100 miles this November, 100 miles plus this November at World's Toughest Mudder. AULM27 writes, love this podcast. 5 stars. I love World's Toughest Mudder, and Will Hicks does a great job of focusing on the toughest developments without repetition. Thanks for all the great interviews. You're welcome, AULM27. Thank you for leaving a review. I appreciate it. Tryboy13 writes, John Tesch's stunt double. 5 stars. Will Hicks is the John Tesh / Ryan Atkins of podcast speakers. He has one of those voices that has those perfect low octaves or whatever they're called that are so pleasing to listen to. That he is the aficionado with Tough Mudder stats and know-all is that extra something that makes each podcast so unique. And I have a confession to make. I don't do podcasts, but when I do, it's always World's Toughest Podcasts. Will isn't just some couch potato golden voice spokesman. He actually gets out there and gets after it, competing in many of the toughest and tougher races I did this year. And he did respectfully well. Ha! Thank you, Tryboy13. I believe that is Mark James, who we will hear from in this episode. So I do like sitting on the couch, but I do like running toughest mudders as well. And I did respectfully well at one of them, and I ran 4 this year. So you're very kind, Tryboy13, but I think I could have done better. But I appreciate the review. You are very kind. If you'd like to leave a review, you can also go to iTunes and search for Tough Mudder. Our logo is the first one that pops up. Click the logo, click Ratings and Reviews, and then click Write a Review. And then write what you think of the show. And I'm happy to take feedback. If you have ideas for how to make the show better, I would love to hear them. You can also shoot me an email at willhicks@gmail.com or find us on Facebook, facebook.com/world's toughest pod. All right, enough of that. Let's find out which was the toughest. Let's go to the phones. We're going to do something today that has never been done in the history of OCR podcasting. I've got 4 guests on the line at the same time. I'm going to introduce them individually in a second, but let me introduce them corporately first. Last fall, Tough Mudder announced the new Toughest Mudder race series. Toughest Mudder is an 8-hour race on a 5-mile looped course. The goal is to run as many 5-mile loops as you can in 8 hours. Tough Mudder held 6 Toughest Mudder races in 3 different countries, leading up to the 24-hour World's Toughest Mudder that will be held this November. The 6 Toughest Mudders were held in Los Angeles, Atlanta, England, Philadelphia, Whistler, which is in British Columbia, Canada, and Chicago. My 4 guests are the only 4 people to complete in all 6 Toughest Mudders this year. Let me introduce them. The only person to compete in all 6 Toughest Mudders and every World's Toughest Mudder to date, and the first person to earn the coveted 100X headband For completing 100 Tough Mudder events, my first guest is Jim Campbell.
Hello. How's it going?
The most well-known member of the WTM community and a finalist for the 2017 OCR Humanitarian Award. She competed in all 6 Toughest Mudder events, qualifying as a contender at 3 of them, including the very difficult Los Angeles course. My next guest is Melissa Sharkbait Dugan.
Of course, I get to follow up behind Jim. Hey, guys.
The only person to qualify as a contender at all 6 Toughest Mudder events this year, and the only one of my guests to blog about the experience at toughmuddersphere.blogspot.com. From America's finest city, my next guest is Mark James.
I can't believe I'm with these rock stars.
The 2015 second-place finisher at World's Toughest Mudder, and the only 6-time Toughest Mudder finisher to qualify as an elite contender, and she did it 3 times in the first 3 races. Even with an injury, she ran 35 miles in Chicago and finished in 7th, just shy of her 4th elite contender slot. My 4th and final guest is Sara Knight.
Hey, everybody.
Okay, first thing, you guys, let's give the people what they want. We'll get into the reasons later, but in one word, which toughest was the toughest? Jim?
Whistler.
Sharkbait?
Those damn hills, LA.
Mark?
UK.
Sara?
UK.
How about that? 3 different answers
Yes.
from 4 different people.
It's decided.
All right, cool. Okay, we're going to talk about Toughest Mudder in 4 parts. First, we'll talk about the series as a whole, then each race individually. Next, we'll go through the 6 races and rank them toughest to least toughest and why you thought that. Then, to wrap up, we'll talk about your single favorite toughest race and your plans for Toughest Mudder in 2018. I'll ask each of you questions individually, but after that person's answered, if you have thoughts on the question, feel free to jump in and talk. So talking about the series as a whole, Jim, what did you think of the whole Toughest Mudder concept?
I think the series as a whole is a win for Tough Mudder, and I think everything about it. I think their execution, I think they had a couple bugs at the start of it when they were trying to work out the courses and how they switched them over in the middle of the night and stuff. But I'll tell you what, by the 3rd race, they had the thing down, and I knew it was going to be a success. So I think it's just the next progressive step up the ladder for Tough Mudder, and I think it's going to be a continued success next year. And I'm guessing they're even going to throw more events out there.
There is no better training, I think, for Worlds than you have for Toughest Mudder. I mean, I think we all realize how we can push our bodies so much harder than we ever thought possible in 8 hours that we're going to see huge numbers for Worlds this year, and then who knows what's going to happen next year. Just those 8 hours are completely different. You can take an 8-hour day of a 3-lap Tough Mudder weekend. It does not compare to the 8 hours of a toughest event overnight. It's so much more competitive and so much better training.
Yeah, no, this series is definitely, I mean, I had grand plans of doing several different obstacle course company races, and after this came out in last fall, I was like, no, okay, scratch everything else off. I'm doing this. This is amazing.
Last year I was doing double and triple laps, thinking, okay, this is all Tough Mudder had to offer for multi-lapping aficionados. And then when they offered the toughest series, where I can go all night, get a sliver of what Worlds is, it was like the perfect race for me.
Sara, you were saying you kind of built your race schedule this year around Toughest Mudder. What surprised you about doing the whole series of 6 races?
I guess that I couldn't do as much back-to-back action that I had hoped, but also on the positive side, it just surprised me that every race had its own personality, so I didn't get bored with it. It was just amazing every time.
Melissa, why did you sign up for all 6?
I had no intention. Unlike Sara, I had no intention. I was definitely doing LA because I love to be at the first of whatever. And then I figured, if something else fits in my schedule, the second I finished LA, I was like, I got to do all of these because I cried, and me and the other guys that I was with, we cried at the end of LA like we cried at the end of Worlds. It was so just life-changing. So absolutely. It's just amazing.
Mark, was it worth it? Would you recommend it?
Well, I got super crazy. I turned 50 in December, and when these were announced, I went, ballistic. I pretty much maxed out the credit card, signed up for all 6 at once, booked all the airlines, and thought, hey, I'm going for it. And I thought this would be a popular notion that a lot of people are doing this. So I was really surprised at the, when all said and done, like 4 of us towed the line.
Let's talk about the individual races. LA, the first Toughest Mudder was held on March 26th outside Los Angeles, California. Melissa, what did you think of the terrain at Toughest LA?
I live on the East Coast of the United States between, Florida or Virginia. I'm not used to those hills, and that's why I said LA. That was just, it was so incredibly tough to keep pushing. And just going up those hills constantly. It was just, to me, it was just the physically the hardest event I've ever done. Worlds is mentally harder, but for in those 8 hours, I'd never done anything harder in my life.
Jim, what did you think of the hills?
I like the hills. I think the problem with me is since we'd never done any of those events, and we turned the phrase triple double just that first event, and I thought, well, that'd be a great idea to do all 3 events, and so I went pretty good in the morning at the first toughest, and it was a mistake because it definitely caught up. I was with you, Will, and we were like falling asleep on the course. I mean, it's been a long day. So that was my mistake. I liked the terrain. I liked how it was flat. I really enjoyed LA, and I think it was a great start to the series, and I think it kind of set the bar for everything else. But it was an eye-opener. I'll tell you what, when everybody was talking about, oh yeah, we're going to do all three events and do this and that, and it really is tougher because it is more like the world's toughest mudder because you're actually up 36 hours and not 24.
Sara, you were out to run with the big boys, or big girls, I guess. What did you think of LA from a competitive point of view?
So competitively, that one was the most strategic thing, most strategic race because it still had the 2-lap format, and the second lap or second loop was way more climb than the first. Almost like having 2 races in one, where the first loop, okay, I got to be ahead of everybody. I have to get in my extra lap before everybody else does so that they can go tackle, the big boy mountain before I have to. And that definitely set everybody apart. So everyone who got that extra one in was seen on the podium. And so that was pretty grueling. And so you kind of had 2 races there. One ended at 4 a.m. and the one that ended at 8:30. It was crazy.
Jim, you mentioned some bugs that Team HQ had to work out at the beginning. How do you think they did from a logistical point of view?
Well, I think they did good compensating for them, but that's one of the reasons why I don't rate LA, even close to the hardest, because the hills were there and that was terrain. But because of the kind of misstep that they had on changing the course over, I mean, you could actually run no obstacles on the backs or on the very front side and get a loop in. And then before they even had people on the second side, the hill section, people were getting 3 laps there. So I think that's the reason that the early toughest weren't as hard as the later ones, because by the time they got it all dialed in and they had just a solid 5-mile loop, I mean, they had their shit together. Like everyone was there and you're running. You get the hour or the hour and a half, whatever they decide to break the people up, and then it's game on the rest of the 8 hours. And I'll tell you what, it was a nice relief. I don't know what the other guys think, but after 4 hours of running that thing, it was nice to have a little blurb and not have to do obstacles again. I think that's what sets probably the first 2 apart from all the rest, is that they had that little gap in between them, which is a faux pas that they had, because they thought, why are we doing this? Why are we taking an original course, breaking it into 2, messing it up? Let's just set a regular 5-mile course, have everybody run it all night. We're not going to have the laps of the things. It's easier to maintain. It's easier to keep lights on. So I think logistically it just made sense to change it up, and that's what they did.
Well, yeah, but it was more of a strategic thing. And then in Chicago, all the obstacles weren't even open till like 2:30. So if it was either you had almost, you had 2.5 hours in the beginning of the race where everybody sprinted, or you had it broken up over 2, one at the first loop, one at the second loop. I think they just changed everyone up a little bit differently. But you also are a goat, so hills don't bother you like they bother other people. So
I prefer the 2-loop format.
I would love that.
Yeah.
I would love it every time, but they're not going to do it anymore because logistically it just doesn't make sense. But it's a lot easier because who doesn't want a free partial lap when they're trying to move volunteers over? And that's all it was. It wasn't that they were trying to give everybody a free lap. It was just logistically they only had so many volunteers and they had to transverse them over to the other obstacles. So that's why it happened.
I think we were all a little shocked on the third race when we thought we had a game plan. After the first 2 races, we can say, okay, if we just sprint the first hour, obstacle free at 3:45. There's probably going to be some more obstacle free action, and then that third race hit, and now we're doing like maybe 17 to 19 obstacles repeatedly. I mean, constantly doing all those obstacles, and that was like, oh no, now I got to change my game plan.
Right, exactly.
I was in the hills. The thing a lot of people talked about from the LA course was the Arctic enema. Mark, what did you think about Arctic enema at Toughest LA?
At LA, I've done 32, not as many as Jim and these other guys, Sara and Melissa, but that was the coldest Arctic enema I've ever experienced. I don't know what they did, but they frickin' serious had some ice in that thing.
Yeah, no,
I don't even remember.
The Arctic enema that I dreaded. I remember going into the first time, I'm like, okay, I don't want to do that again. So like the rest of the 5 miles until I had to hit it again, that was the only thing I was thinking of. So I've never experienced anything like that before.
Yeah, it was cold, but I just sat in there and cooled my hip off, so I liked it.
Yeah, I'm like, every time I do Arctic enema, I hate when I'm doing it, but the second I finish, my body feels better, so I don't mind them.
They literally told me at Philadelphia and at the UK that if I didn't get out, that they were going to penalize me because they were going to bring the medical staff over. And they said that people are having hypothermia. Yeah, they said, you have a mental deficiency, and we're going to come and we're going to take you off the course. And I said, well, that may be true, but I need to cool my hip down before I keep going. So, but yeah, it was cold at LA for sure.
Guys, any other thoughts on Toughest Mudder Los Angeles?
Watching Ryan Atkins push on that last lap was one of the coolest things ever. I got to say.
Were you on course? Did he pass you?
He passed me, and it was
3 times.
We all knew what was but the last lap, we all knew what was going on, and it was amazing because you knew, like, I'm limping and screaming because my T-band was really bad the last lap, and he is just sprinting up this mountain past me. It was amazing to see. Absolutely amazing.
And also Wesley Kerr, they just were so fatigued at the end. They gave it their all. It was just really amazing to see.
Yeah, Ryan was just spent after he was with Lindsay and talked to her and everything. He came over and I stuck a coat around him. You could just tell he was done. He wasn't talking. He wasn't, he's usually BSing or saying something or bringing me something, and he was spent. You could tell he felt he had just left everything out there, and I think everybody in the paddock could see that. It was evident.
Something else that was cool about the first one was seeing Tough Mudder headquarters set up little traditions like the champagne at the on the podium, which I guess they didn't invent, but it was kind of new for Tough Mudder.
I got the mug in LA, so I was happy that I got the only podium mug.
And they didn't do it anywhere else.
That's right. They did mimosas at the first one. Yeah.
Yeah, the mimosas were great.
The second Toughest Mudder was held on April 30th outside Atlanta, Georgia. Sara, this course was much flatter than LA. Did that help you or hurt you going after a win?
Yeah, the flatness of the course wasn't hurting me. I had super bad stomach issues on that race. So I guess it did help me because it still enabled me to get 5th place on that race. But it was kind of nice getting in. I remember that one part on the second loop where it was like super misty and cool, and I remember always wanting to go in that area. And then the nice Arctic enema, which was just like bath water. So those were nice and cooling. But the flatness of the course definitely would have made, or it did make, everyone's first lap super fast. I remember not catching up to the lead pack right away after that. So it made strategy a little bit different, trying to conserve speed and energy while everyone's busting out the gate. It was crazy.
Jim, what were your thoughts on the flat course? To compensate for the flatness, Tough Mudder ramped up the obstacle difficulty for Atlanta.
Yeah, I think they definitely had some tougher stuff. The mud mile was crazy hard. The flatness of the terrain, God, that was just a beautiful thing. Where Sara referred to it with that haze kind of sitting over those fields there at night. Like, that was an awesome look. And again, that was the last 10-mile course switching over before they did both loops. But I liked it. That's actually, believe it or not, in all my events, and this is a true statement, that's the warmest Tough Mudder I'd ever done. Like, I've never been out in the middle of the night just in shorts and a shirt, which is all I wore, and it was just all night. The water was nice. Everything was just, that's what kind of, and not to get off on another topic, but that's what makes me think about possibly a spot for a world's toughest mudder again, because everything logistically was just, it worked there, and even in winter it would work that way. But I got to tell you, that's probably one of the funnest events I've ever done. And I hit 20 miles there because it seemed a little easier because it was flat. So I just kept going and going, and I was pretty strong on the obstacles on that one. But man, just the venue was nice. And when the sun came up over the lake and where a lot of the hang time and other obstacles were set up on that back side, it was really a beautiful venue. So, I mean, I liked it. I think they ramped up the obstacles, but I think, the flatness evened it out. So I think it was a good turn. Again, I think they're thinking about all this stuff. They aren't just throwing it out there. What I've seen in Tough Mudder as they've grown older is I see better obstacle placement and more thoughtful obstacle placement. Like, in the early days, they used to just throw you into the mud mile and then they put Funky Monkey after. Well, they aren't doing that anymore, because they're letting it become a race.
No, now it's Arctic Enema and then Funky Monkey. They don't want us to feel our fingers anymore.
Right. They don't want us to feel our fingers, but at least they're clean. How about that? So the whole process has become more thoughtful, and I think in that they've made better events, and we're still get to realize that and get to appreciate that, because not a lot of people were around in the early days, and I mean they used to just make it painful. I mean they could set these things and they don't. That's what I'm saying. Why they're setting them mindfully is that they could set these things so they're just undoable for all of us, for the elites, for everybody, and they're not doing it that. They're doing it thoughtfully, and they're making everyone enjoy it. And I think all that's going to do, like Melissa said earlier, is just going to build these events to where they're just mini world's toughest mudders. I think it's a great business plan.
Atlanta was the warmest of all 6 toughest races, like Jim just said. Mark, how did the weather affect your race?
The weather was fine. I mean, I think I just wore my bib, a pair of tights, some arm compression sleeves. I loved Atlanta. I ran through those little single-track trails, and I was just in bliss until my headlamp went out. And then I wasn't in bliss because I was doing the Helen Keller Braille method, trying to figure out where I was for 5 minutes. And if it wasn't for 3 mudders who were there 200 yards to my right because I went off trail, I probably would still be in the woods today. But it's probably my favorite course, my easiest course for sure.
Based on the Saturday morning racers, there was some concern about Loch Ness Monster being dug deeper than was safe. Melissa, how did that end up playing out overnight?
Well, at all the toughest, I never ran in the morning. I always slept in, rested. I was not nearly, yeah. And I told everybody else not to do it either, and none of them listened until the end.
You didn't tell me.
Yeah, I did. I yelled at you a few times. So I heard about it in the morning, and everyone said, oh, my gosh, it's over my head. But no, by the time we got there, headquarters listened, because at least by the time I got there, it wasn't over my head. So they listened, and it wasn't nearly as bad.
They drain water out of it during the day. So so they listen. If we say something, they do listen, and that was a safety concern, because there were times that I was alone on course, even though there was a pretty busy, there was more people there than LA. But I remember, like Mark was just saying, Atlanta is also my favorite course. It was so much fun, and I love running at night, single track trails. And I was alone. And if I ended up being alone in Loch Ness, and somebody, as we know, people can't swim, that could have been a problem.
Any last thoughts on toughest mudder Atlanta? How terrible is that airport?
Mud mile. Mud mile. That's all I can say about it.
Yeah, mud mile.
That was a double mud mile, and it was legit.
Yeah, it was a tough one.
Yeah, I didn't like the airport.
Yeah, well, you hate that airport.
I know. You know why, too. Anyway.
The third race in the series was also the first international toughest mudder. Europe's toughest mudder was held on May 14th in the UK. Mark, what were some differences between toughest in the UK and toughest in the US?
Well, here's what it was. You cannot get to the airport 40 minutes before an international flight like I can with the national flights. So I did some serious pleading and begging, and I actually cried a little bit at the LAX airport when I got there. Got caught in traffic, and somehow they got me on the flight, and I made it. So logistics, you think about these 6 races, and you have 2 international races. Getting to the venue is harder than the race itself. But I listed UK as the hardest race. I mean, it rained the whole time. I was cold. If you look at the statistics, and Will, you're the champ at stats, and you have 60 out of 700 contenders, or it's not contenders. Contestants going only 5 miles. 5 miles is what the cover, which pretty much the first hour of the course is a free lap. They hit.
Yeah, but you can't. But those are the European. A lot of those Europeans have never done Worlds, and a lot of those European. I mean, that's a whole different. That's a whole different audience. A lot of those people, they just wanted to experience it. I think a lot of the people that do toughest.
Gil called it. At the start, he's like, hey, we got the Americans, the Germans, the Australians, they all train. And then we have the locals, and there was a big yell and cheer, and I was so stoked.
They were already drunk. I mean, come on.
I know. God bless them.
To Melissa's point, I think,
and I was shell-shocked.
To Melissa's point, I think she is right in this one instance of all the instances.
Love you too, Jim.
Is that that's why I rate the UK second and Whistler first, because what you guys don't take into consideration, everybody looks at the numbers, everybody looks at all this stuff that goes on. You have to look at the people that actually run these things and the ones that run all of them competitively, because skill level over there is what it is here, and what Melissa says is exactly right. When 70% or 50% of the people have done World's Toughest Mudder. Over there, I guarantee you it wasn't 10% of the people that had done World's Toughest Mudder. So you were dealing with people that had never been to an 8-hour event, never done stuff at night. There was a lot of people. I mean, I was in the middle of the night helping the Great Britain Olympic gymnastics team get over. And if you can imagine how far the skill level would have to drop for the GOAT to actually help competitive people over the obstacles all night.
I'm sure those girls appreciate you, Tim.
Don't they all? But yes, so that's my contention of why it's second and not first. But Mark's right about all the other things. It rained the whole time. It was hard. It was so freaking muddy over there. I mean, it was way muddier than Philadelphia was. And John Albon just glided through all the mud and everything, and just was effortless, stopped every lap to take a picture with me. And I'm like, shouldn't you get going? He's like, no, I'm having a good time. It's good. It's not going to get any muddier. And I'm like, not muddier? What are you talking about? Like, there was sections of, after the mud mile, there was a section of swath there that was like another obstacle, like a marsh. And I mean, you would just sink and go in that. And he was just lollygagging through it. Like, people are just dragging bodies through it, and he's just like jumping on top of the grass.
What about that birth canal, though? They figured out that we would go to the side.
That was the worst birth canal ever. You're exactly right. Hardest birth canal ever.
Absolutely.
Why was that one so bad?
It was like dragging a dead body for 30 feet, and that dead body was yours.
Well, they did 2 things. They added a lot of water, so there was a lot of weight on top of you. And then they realized that we would go to the far end of the bracing, and we would be able to scoot through, where usually there's almost no effort. They put big metal or big plastic piping where you couldn't get to the side. So I had to get on my side, bring my knees up fully to my chest, put my feet on the bracing, and push my upper body just to move. It was exhausting.
Yeah, it was the hardest one ever. In 130 events, it was the hardest one ever. So,
wow,
hands down, not even close. That's how hard it was.
The toughest birth canal, and then Block Ness was bigger, longer, and Hang Time had no cargo net. It was just the rope.
Yeah.
Right?
Their obstacles were up a notch, weren't they, Sarah? For sure.
Yeah. I liked it that way, though.
Sarah, this was the second
you
time.
did well.
Yeah, I was going to say, Sarah,
killed over there.
this was the second time you placed second at a toughest race. What was it like competing against a field where you didn't know automatically who the top runners would be?
Oh, that was a big surprise, actually, because second to last lap, I'm just finishing off Kong and walking through EST, and one of the girls notices my leader bib on, and she's like, "Oh, what lap are you on?" And I'm like, "Oh, this is finishing number 5." And she's like, "Me too." I'm like, "Oh," because she was literally walking there beside me. I'm like, "Okay, later."
Is that how you said it? Oh.
Yeah, kind of, I think so. So, yeah, but, so just not knowing anybody, just have to be on the A game all the time.
Jim, your 100X events and your strong selfie game has made you an unofficial ambassador for Tough Mudder. What was it like going to What was it like going to a foreign country and having people want to take their picture with you?
I don't know. It was just all new and just refreshing and just nice. And then Melissa was there, so she pretty much took the limelight. Once they saw her, they forgot about me like stale bread. I mean, it was
whatever.
Nothing.
You've been going over there for years.
Melissa, did they know you when you showed up?
Well, that was my second time. I went to Midland Tough Mudder the year prior. On top of that, the few people that were at the toughest in UK that did Worlds, and Jim as well knows them. So yeah, some people do know. And I'm the Legionnaire page I'm not too active on, but I do, know some of the people on there.
I'll tell you a fun fact about the race is I saw 3 major tourist attractions on the way to the venue the night before the venue. That's what was amazing. I saw Abbey Road, Stonehenge, and drove over to the cliffs of Dover all the day before, just because I like staying busy. So that's what was cool about the race to me. And then watched Mark James barely make it to the race, being picked up at Graham Station.
You mean
Chris James got me.
My midnight phone call from a Paris club drunk wasn't the highlight of that week, Jim?
No, I liked the drunk text that I got from you. That was fun, but I didn't know if you wanted me to mention it as I talked to you in a bar stall in Paris somewhere. A random call for Sharkbait.
I had a great vacation.
You did. It sounded like it too.
Any last thoughts on Toughest Mudder UK?
It was badass. I hope. I know they're having there next year. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, and not to knock the contestants in Europe that we're saying, they haven't done Worlds. Those people want to do Worlds. It's not that they don't have, I'm sure that as they get, more of these overnight events, that they'll get better and better. It's just experience. But there are some really great competitors over there.
No, that's why if they have Worlds over there, it's gonna kill the books. It's gonna be bigger than ever. I guarantee you, everybody will come. Mm. One more thing on that was a tough race for Sara to do so well in, and all I can tell you is the girl that beat her, that girl was stout. That's all I'm going to say. So
she's awesome.
I thought Sara was going to possibly win. Yeah, no, she was doing great, but I thought Sara was going to get her. So it was a pretty amazing feat. I just want to include that. That's all.
All right.
The next race was held a week later outside Philadelphia on May 21st. This was the 4th race in the Toughest Mudder series. Sara, you finished top 5 in your first 3 Toughest Mudders. You only finished 15 miles at Philly. What was different at Philly?
Philly, I knew I was hurting when the gun went off, pretty much. So that first little teeny downhill that we went down, my knee took a beating from Europe. So that one, I was just like, okay, mile number 1, I have now decided I am not competing. So I just kind of jogged around for a couple laps, and then went and warmed up, put on a wetsuit, and went one final lap. And I just went out to help people. So I stood at each obstacle and helped 100 people, and then I'd move to the next one. So that was a fun one.
I could vouch for Sara. I came around a corner, and there's Sara was picking up cups from, mudders had thrown their cups off to the left and the right. I'm like, that's Sara Knight? Oh my gosh, she's picking up the cups. I'm like, what is she doing? 3 laps here. I felt so bad. I'm like, oh my God, I'm hallucinating. But yeah,
that's like watching Jennifer Aniston clean up after a wedding party. Just so you know, that's what it was like.
Exactly, it was.
Jim, what was the terrain like in Philly?
It was good. It was up and down. It was hills. In fact, it was a lot like the Tough Mudder I just went to in Pittsburgh. They're very similar. It's got that long kind of wet grass, and the mud's a real mud, and it's definitely authentic. There's trees and roots and everything else on the trail. It was tough. They made you go up and down, and it had some killer penalty loops for like Funky Monkey and some other ones, and it was kind of why were the monkey bars? It wasn't raining? Why was the monkey bars so wet? I forget. Does anybody remember?
It was freaking cold. It was like 48 degrees or something.
It's just
you see my breath.
Okay. Well,
it still has humidity.
It's where I got banned from Arctic Enema because they wouldn't let me say it any longer. I don't want to beat that to death, but it wasn't that cold. But anyway, yeah, the monkey bars were undoable. And then you had to go like up and down 3 football fields to get around them. So it was tough. They had a lot of good hill obstacles. And then there was another one up on the, what was it, Stage 5 Clingers. It had a nasty little penalty loop too. So it really had some hills in the penalty terrain. So that's what I remember was super hard about it. I think I've got it listed as number 3 hardest, and it was definitely a legit course. So I loved it, though. Another great venue from Tough Mudder.
Mark. Those football fields, Jim, they weren't flat. They were at a slope the whole way.
Exactly. There was a lot of hills.
Oh,
that's what I meant.
Right.
A lot of terrain.
Yeah.
Mark, they're at a slope, meaning like it's left to right. As you're not going uphill, but you're like running sideways.
Running sideways. Yeah. So one leg feels a little shorter than the other one. It was just cold. Like I said earlier, you could see your breath. Philly was extremely special for me because I went out for my 30th. I did 25. I thought, no way I'm going to get 5. And it came down to the wire about 2 minutes or 10 minutes before the 8:30 cutoff. I just completely ran out of steam, and I was begging for sugar from someone with a magic Snickers bar. I failed Kong again, and I picked up a used goo off the ground, and that's how desperate I was. I picked up the used goo, and I chewed on the wrapper, and I crossed the finish line with 15 seconds to spare. 15 seconds, I just fell and collapsed. My buddy Whitney Tosin came over and just gave me like a Coke and a Gatorade. It was a very special race, but man, I suffered at that one.
Is that a true story? You picked up a used goo out of the dirt?
Yeah, that's how I am. Yeah, used goo.
I've seen him do that at regular events too, though. It's not that special. He's just thrifty. That's all.
I spent all my money. I'm telling you, I'm totally broke.
That's a great story. It's funny too. It's hilarious.
Melissa, at this point at Philly, you're 4 races in, and you've done your second long race in 2 weeks. Did you ever get sick of it?
No, not at Philly. I was actually very happy. My last 2 laps at Philly were faster than my first 2 because I was so broken in Europe. But then Friday night, Mike Phillips, a mudder, his wife Sue Phillips, is a neurokinetic therapist, and she worked on me, and she basically fixed me to where I could run on the next day, to where I thought I wouldn't be able to even run it. I was like, I might just get 1 lap in, and I was so ecstatic. And I know Philly was tough, but to me, because of the fact that I remember at the end of the race, I was squatting and jumping and showing everyone that I could squat and jump, because just a week prior in Europe, I couldn't put my leg over a curb. I had to lift my leg up with my hand. So, no, it was not at Philly. I was sick of it by Canada, but in Philly, I was still good.
How are the rest of you guys feeling after 4 races? Were you enjoying it still, or were you kind of ready for a break?
My body wasn't happy, but yeah, just happy heart, happy mind.
Yeah, halfway through, I was craving more though.
Any last thoughts on Toughest Mudder Philly?
It's a good time.
Mm-hmm. That's fun.
Good venue, good location.
The penultimate race in the Toughest Mudder series was held in Whistler, British Columbia, Canada. It was held on June 17th. Jim, the big talk before Whistler was the possibility of bears on the course. How did Team HQ react to the bear scare? What ended up happening?
They rubbed butter on each of our asses and told us it was pretty much do the best you can. Oh, okay. Rubbed butter on their behinds and said, "Hey, take care of yourself." No, I didn't think it was. I think they did a good job because they had crews out there with dogs who were barking, who were actually locating the bears and kind of keeping them off everyone. I did a crazy picture of a selfie I took in the middle of the night, and it was just in pitch black, and that's the only reason I took it. I'm like, it'll be kind of fun to have a pitch black picture. And sure as shit, there was a bear like right beside me when I took the picture, and I didn't know it until I put the film on a computer later on. But it scared me after, but it didn't scare me there because I never had the feeling like a bear was around me. I'd hear the dogs barking off somewhere else, and through the day we'd went, and they'd only seen like one bear in the morning that day. And I don't know, I felt pretty good about it. I thought there was only like 200 and some people that even started the race, so I thought they had a pretty good handle on it, and I think they did a great job. Everybody got a whistle. And I heard some whistles.
What was that whistle? Really? What was that whistle? That whistle was alerting someone that you were going to die. That's what that whistle was.
Right. But Chris Behringer, actually, between, if you remember where Operation wasn't Arctic Enema and Operation right by each other? Isn't it on that flat right there? Wasn't it, guys?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, they were together. He got out of Arctic Enema, walked out, got halfway between there and Operation, and there was a bear right there. So he started blowing his whistle, and he said when he blew his whistle, the bear started following him. So he kept blowing his whistle, and he kept thinking somebody'd come up, and there's only 200 people on the course. He's like, I'm blowing my effing whistle, and the bear's following me. And I keep getting closer to the obstacle, and like right before he got to the obstacle, the bear just jumped back in the bushes. And he's like telling him, and it was like a spook story. Like, sure it was, Chris. Yeah, there's no bear around here. No, there's a bear right behind me. Yeah, Chris, just do the obstacle and go on, And it was funny because he was emphatic about it. Like, the bear just kept following me, and I kept blowing the whistle. The harder I blew the whistle, it was like attracting the bear. So I don't know if those whistles work or not. They probably hear him so much, but I didn't.
Yeah, they're kind of like pets there.
Yeah, exactly.
The funny thing about those whistles, they issue these little orange whistles, and I'm thinking bears. I don't care about bears. Actually, Melissa posted a really cool picture of the bears on the way to the race. And so all through the night, you don't see anything, and then in the morning, the sun comes up, and you start seeing these little piles of bear poop. And if you look really closely in the bear poop, you can see these little orange whistles.
We started with over 200 people and ended with 180, right?
But they're all contenders.
The other big thing at Whistler was the giant ski hill that opened at dawn. Mark, tell me about that ski hill.
Well, that was the fear. It was like, hey, you guys got to do that ski hill. I'll pass it on the way up. And the unique thing about this race is all the other ones, by the time you check in at 9 or 10, it's dark. Well, up in Canada, it's still light out, so you can see the other contestants. So it gets dark, and the big fear is when are we going to do the ski hill? And they said, at 3 a.m. it's going to open. At 4 a.m. it's going to open. The ski hill didn't open until, someone can correct me on this, but I think 6 or 7 a.m. So majority of us, maybe Sarah did it 2 or 3 times, but I only had to do that thing once. When I was going up, actually, Trevor Psychos asked me, and we had this full-on conversation. I don't know how we did it, but we just talked, and then that was it for me. So I did it once.
Yeah, I think it opened earlier than that. They did. I think Ryan did it 3 times at least. So, how many times did you do it, Sarah?
I actually only did it once as well. Those Whistler Hills just killed my knee again, so had to take myself out again.
Sarah, you were racing on 1 month's rest since Toughest Philly. How was it your leg that was injured or your IT band?
IT band, yeah. It's just constant nagging chronic thing going on, and 1 month recovery did not help a thing. So I just, after the first probably 5 to 7 miles, then it was just back to the pain that I was feeling right back in Philly again. I was like, okay, I recognize this, and we're not a competitor again. Woohoo!
Maybe we need to get you with Sue Phillips, Melissa's lady.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa, you and I pitted next to each other in Whistler. Before the race started, there was a lot of concern about the cold. How did the weather affect you in Whistler?
It was cold, and Jim had done the race earlier. Oh, sorry. And Jim kind of told us, hey, it's going to be cold. Wear a wetsuit. And I learned wearing a wetsuit, all these races, I always wear the wetsuit, and 2 miles later, I tear the damn thing off. But the question was addressed to Melissa. What do you think?
It's okay. No, we knew it was going to be cold, but the best, I love racing in the cold. The more, suffering, the better. But the best part, and was in the middle of the night around 3 or 4, if you were at the top for just a few minutes before it started to rain, it was snow. I swear to God.
Yeah, we were together then.
It snowed. Exactly. Remember, Sarah? And it was snowing.
Yeah, I remember.
We could say like, oh my gosh, we raced in snow. And it didn't stick. But it definitely wasn't rain. And so to say I've raced in snow, I'm really excited about. But no, I like the cold. The colder, the better. The more suffering, the better.
Jim, you ranked Whistler as your toughest course. Why did you say that?
Well, for the obvious, it's the only race that Ryan only got 45 miles in. I think the ski slope made the big factor because in all the other things, they progressively kind of made it easier as it went through the night, whether it was the loops or the other stuff that they changed over to. And this thing, they're right. The guys are right. Like, I only did the ski slope once too, but he did it 3 times. And when you're running competitively for that, when you come to that thing and you run your heart out for 4 or 5 hours and you get to this huge hill that's like that race back in Europe where it's just up the ski slope, it just wears it out of you. And that combined with, I think it had a more competitive field up there and the amount of people that qualified and didn't qualify. And then along with Atkins' number, that in itself should state that was the hardest one. The cold was intense the whole time. It was cold right from the start, right from the get-go. I think it was truly the one that was out there in the dark. When we started in the dark, I don't know if you guys agree, but that's the darkest it's ever been when I've actually raced or done anything. That is comparable to what I train in Colorado at night in Crested Butte. That was identical to it. You're basically out in the middle of nowhere with these big tall trees around you. There's nothing around you, and it's just you and whatever. With only 200 people starting on that thing, I think it reminded me specifically of like the very first World's Toughest Mudder. Like you would get to an obstacle like, oh, we're glad to see somebody, because there was such a spread of everyone throughout the course, and it's just when you're doing that kind of mentality and that, with the other races, there was a lot of people. I saw them all the time. There were people to help you on the obstacles. There were obstacles there that I got to, did by myself and left and made it. And as opposed to a lot of people that probably weren't making it because there just wasn't the number of people around. I know it was the lowest attended, but I think it was the coldest. I think the terrain, it was the hardest only because they made the terrain harder as it went on. And I think the third factor is Ryan only got 45 miles, and that guy gives it everything every single time. So that's. But
was Ryan being? I don't remember, so I'm not saying he wasn't. But was Ryan being pushed like he was in LA?
He wasn't. He said, you know what? I know you guys are going to have an iPod, iCast thing later on, and I want to just hold back here, and I only want to get 45 miles so you guys have something to argue over later. That's what he was
well,
talking
there you
about.
go. Well, there you go. But no, Chad was pushing him in LA. And the one thing that, you see with Ryan is he's a smart racer. There was a world that he could have gone out for a last lap and hit 100. But he's like, why? Why do I need to hit 100? I won at 95. So he had already
done 5, and he had already figured out the thing on it. And he could have, and he said he was going to go out one more time, but he didn't think he could get around because of the hill. That was his exact words. So I think because, like I said on the other ones, he even left like with just a few minutes on one of them and still made the 50-mile thing. Trust me, if you know anyone in Tough Mudder that's going to walk away from $5,000 if they get to run 5 more miles, that's absolutely incorrect, because if he would have done it and he could have completed it, he would have done it, because $5,000 is $5,000. So
good point.
Any last thoughts?
I'm with you on I'm with Jim on the difficulty, but also Whistler's like 2 to 3 hours away from where I live. So because it's so familiar, cold doesn't bother me. Being alone in the dark doesn't bother me. used to live in Whistler with the Bears too, so they're my friends. So it was just comfortable for me. So that's why it wasn't as like quote unquote difficult for me. But yeah, it was a tough one.
Any last thoughts? For the general Toughest Mudder Canada.
Don't eat Walmart sushi beforehand. That's all I have to say.
Chicago. The sixth and final Toughest Mudder of the year was held outside Chicago. It was held on August 22nd, more than 2 months after Toughest Mudder Canada. Mark, going into Chicago, you'd reach contender 5 out of 5 times. How important was it for you to hit contender in Chicago?
It was really important. I thought I could do it easy peasy on Tuesday, and then Wednesday I sprained my ankle terribly bad. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I wanted Jim had called it the 4 Horsemen, and I had to be there no matter what. And talked to my physical therapist, and he worked on my ankle for 3 days. I got a great wrap. And then I even did the tougher race in the morning, and I thought, okay, I can at least get 25. And it was definitely one of my favorite, the easiest. I thought I didn't wear a wetsuit. I went very, very minimal as far as what I wore during the whole race, and flat and very, very fast. I was just disappointed that I'd kind of hurt myself.
Melissa, one obstacle unique to Chicago was the river crossing. Tell me about the river crossing and the terrain in Chicago.
I loved Chicago. I needed those 2 months off. I mean, physically, mentally. With Canada, I was mentally done with that race before I started it. I was telling people, I can't wait for it to be over because then I have a 2-month break. But by the time Chicago came up, I was ready. I love the river crossing. I'm a swimmer. So I would go in, and then once I got to the point where we really needed to hold onto the rope, I just traversed the rope all the way up. I just turned around and used my upper body, so it gave my lower body a little bit of a break. Terrain was fun, even though there was just that like one hill to go up to the crossing of a road. I would complain about the one hill, but besides that, I thought it was great. I like Mark. I got a little chilly when it started to rain on us on the last lap, but that's the closest I ever got to putting in 30 miles, but I did get 25 again, so I was happy, and I didn't have any pain. I didn't have any injuries. I was ready for that one.
Sara, you told me in Chicago you were still nursing that injury from the UK Philly back-to-back. How did you do in Chicago?
Mm-hmm. She beat me speed walking. She was speed walking, and she passed me. That's how she did.
I became the speed walking queen. You should have put like 2-pound dumbbells in each of my hands. It was pretty epic. Once I found out that speed walking was fast, then I just kept going with it, and it didn't hurt. So yeah, I didn't have any pounding and no downhills, obviously, to matter for. So that course, I probably would have been really bored with that course if I had to run it because it was so flat. But I had a blast out there just being the speed walking queen.
There is nothing more discouraging than when I'm running and I'm tired and I'm running and someone passes me walking.
Or talking.
That's what she did to me.
Jim, all season long, you were running Tougher Mudder on Saturday morning before running Toughest on Saturday night. Do you think that cost you 5 miles or 10 miles in Chicago?
No, I think Chicago was the easiest one. What I wouldn't recommend for everyone is to carry a 4x8 book around for 5 hours before the race and promote any kind of book opening and signing. But we carried Wildean's book around because running Tougher wasn't enough, so we decided to carry the giant plywood version of It Takes a Tribe, and it was fun. It was a good time. But I still got 20 miles in Chicago, which is the same I got in Atlanta. So I think Chicago was a little easier. I think it did wear me out for the next day. That Chicago was the only one that I didn't get up on Sunday and do it. I was literally just spent. Like, I think carrying that book around just wore my upper body out, and I could not do the event on Sunday. So that's the only one. But I got to say this: I was looking forward to Chicago just to see these 3 nut jobs, because at that point in the year, we had kind of termed the phrase the 4 Horsemen, and I got to tell you, like that was it for me, to see these guys and get a picture with them and kind of culminate the whole year with them. It meant a lot to me to go all around the world with them, and and perform and see what we did and kind of form that friendship. Some of us were friends, some of us were new friends, and it really made it kind of special. And that's what I'm going to take away from the whole series, is that we've got that to share and to take into next year. And it's kind of a big deal, just like me doing all the world's toughest mudder and in a lot of the Tough Mudder events. It's going to be a big deal, years down the road, because it only started off with 4 of us, so it could only go down from there. And I think Tough Mudder, I don't know, they really didn't make mention of it. They made a little mention of it at the start and then excluded Melissa, and then I had to yell at them because I was right up there by the front. But they only included 3 of us have done it, and I'm like, no, 4 of us have done it. Because she signs up under her, kitty email address on one of them, evidently, and it didn't get registered. But anyway, we all got credit for it, and had a great picture. And I got to tell you guys, in an open forum here, I love you to death, and it's a big deal doing that with you guys.
Well,
yeah, that was definitely very cool.
Ton of fun.
Mark, at the start line, Jim mentioned Eli Hutchison from Team HQ recognized you for. What was it like to be called out or to be publicly recognized like that in front of everybody?
Yeah, like Jim said, he started talking about it, and to omit Melissa, who's just such a force in Tough Mudder, like Jim and Sara are, was just kind of like, I don't know. Hopefully there was something else. I'm not asking for glory or anything else, but it's quite an achievement, as I said before. The logistics and expense and just managing to stay uninjured and to make it from race to race to race is quite a feat in itself. And also, like Jim said, I've gotten to know these 3 individuals, and I'm going to see them again at some tougher races. I think at Sara, hopefully I'll see you next week in Seattle and at Worlds for sure. And it's definitely a bond. I'm going to frame that picture of us 4, and that's going to be right up next to my other things that I've done. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Melissa, this was the last big Tough Mudder race until World's Toughest in November. Were you sad when it was over?
Not sad. I felt fulfilled. It was nice. It's always nice when you set out a goal and you hit that goal. And I know, because of the fact that really I'll be sad at the end of Worlds, because this was just a ramping up to Worlds, and I know I'll see those 3 at Worlds. So when Worlds is over, I'll be sad, but then we get to start anew next year.
Let's talk about the series as a whole. Sara, you started strong in the first 3 races, had a dip for 4 and 5, and came back with a solid performance in the last race. How do you feel about the series as a whole?
The series was awesome. Yeah, like I said before, every single race had its own personality and surprises, and it was just exciting to go from one to the next. I was in it to win it, and I was hoping to just get better and better on each one, but running injuries suck. But I am definitely getting a lot more solid, and I'm now mentally prepared for Worlds more than ever. That's just epic training that I went through.
Mark, you got contender status at all 6 races. A few people did it at 5 of the 6. Allison Ty, Tyler Nash, Adrian Alvord. How were you able to hit that goal every single time?
Yeah, that elite status would have been kind of nice, but like Jim, I'm 50, and my recovery is not what it used to be. I walk around, and it's kind of like Yoda in that one movie where he kind of like hobbles with a stick, and then all of a sudden he does a race, and he can do halfway decent, and I'm hobbling on a stick afterwards.
Hey, don't take my gig, buddy.
I'm very pleased I finished all 6. I'm going for 75. That's my first Worlds last year. I had 73 with penalties and then 60 official miles. So I'm working on my upper body strength. I'm not going to swim. I'm a swimmer primarily, so unfortunately there's not much swimming in these events. So I'm going to work on upper body and my running, and probably cut back on the wine consumption and hopefully bring it. And Tyler and Ryan are in contention for that Holy Grail status. I heard your last podcast, and I'm going for it. There's no money involved. If you do the toughest in Worlds, you get that Holy Grail. But I want to be top of the podium, and it's going to come down to Worlds, and doing everything I can to get that.
Jim, I know Tough Mudder means a lot to you personally. What has been your reaction to the growth and changes Tough Mudder's made this year?
I think, with this toughest series and with TMX and all the stuff they're coming out with, I think really since the beginning, I think it's come to a new level. I think they've mastered the obstacle parts. I think they've really come with all the logistics of moving stuff around and getting people to and from events and planning where they go. I know they still have some duds every once in a while, but then they don't go back there anymore. They just pull out of it and they don't. So they're learning from all the previous years and stuff. And I think it's just going to continue to get better. I think they're on the top of the heap right now. And I think with all this stuff they're going to release with next year, and I'm guessing they're going to have a larger, toughest series. And I think that's going to draw more people. And I think they're going to finally get World's Toughest Mudder to where they've wanted to get it, which is around 2,000 people or maybe even 2,500 people. I can see the day coming after this year, and this is honest to God fact. I can see the day coming where they limit the entries at World's Toughest Mudder, and I think that's going to have to come because, as crowded as it gets, and forget about the people that quit in the middle of the night. Like sometimes there's just too many people on the course. I mean, there's going to be lines and backups, and I don't know that they're going to make 10 rows of everything. But maybe if they get that kind of entry, maybe they can build something with 8 rows, or a lot of the times it's the swinging like double rainbow. I saw lines on and stuff last year, but that's what I envision for them. I see it just getting bigger and better. Everybody else is talking about some of these races drying up and stuff. I think Tough Mudder is on the forefront. I think they're going to stay there, and I think I'm pretty happy to be part of it, as well as I guess these other 3 people are too.
Melissa, if someone's only done a 10-mile Tough Mudder and is thinking about doing a toughest Mudder in 2018, what would you say to them?
I would absolutely tell them if you can do, and actually I just did this past weekend in Wisconsin Tough Mudder when people would ask about it. I say, imagine what you're doing now, this 10-mile course, slowing it down and just doing it for a little bit longer and having a life-changing event in just 8 hours or 24 hours based on whichever event you want to do. People, if they have the goal to go out and do a Tough Mudder, because I remember how scared I was to do my Tough Mudder, if you actually show up and cross that starting line, then you absolutely have the balls to do toughest or even World's Toughest. It's just at that point, putting the training in, learning nutrition, and getting the gear. You have the heart.
Do any of you 4 have any last thoughts on the series as a whole?
Let me finish up with this, but then because I want to speak to us as more like ambassadors and all 4 of us when I'm talking. But at the Philly event, and I've never done this before, I've motivated people about World's Toughest Mudder and different things. Like we were talking about toughest at night, and we were running the tougher event early in Philly. I actually got 3 guys to sign up for toughest that night after just doing the event with us. I mean, that's how excited, and that's what kind of fanfare it creates. People are like, yeah, you guys are going to come back and do this at night. We're like, fuck yeah, we're coming back. We're doing it. And that creates that kind of enthusiasm, and it's just infectious. And I think Tough Mudder has that again. I mean, I know you guys have all been around a while, but back in 11 and 12, it was just like that. Like people were just like, you do that? Like it was like a badass thing, right? And I think it's kind of getting that same, it's kind of coming back. It's coming back to where it is, I think, and it's because of the toughest series. I think it's because of TMX. I think it's because, World's Toughest Mudder has kind of been that thing that has stayed there. All of us have done it, but then people talk about it. And that's what happened. We were talking about toughest, just the regular Tough Mudder on Saturday. These guys are like, you guys are crazy. And we're like, no, man, it's fun. Like everybody there is like us, and everybody supports you, and it's like Tough Mudder on steroids, just like World's Toughest. And these guys go, are you serious? And by the end of it, they walked over. They literally walked. We got done. We showered up. We had a beer, walked over. Those guys paid and signed up. I mean, that's amazing to be able to create that kind of interest in something, and to all of us to be that kind of ambassador that we can share that and draw people in. I think that's pretty amazing.
That's awesome.
Okay, let's rank the toughest. Which toughest was the toughest? Jim, from toughest to least toughest. Go.
Whistler.
Okay.
UK. Philadelphia. LA. Atlanta and Chicago.
Sharkbait. Go.
LA, Europe, Whistler, Philly, Chicago, Atlanta.
Mark James, go.
All right. UK, Philly, LA, Whistler, Atlanta, and Chicago.
Sara Knight, go.
UK, LA, Whistler, Atlanta, Philly, Chicago.
It's up to you, Will, to make a rubric of all those.
I know. I have to do the math. What jumps out right away is Chicago. 3 of the 4 of you put Chicago as the easiest. Sharkbait had it as the 5th, number 5. UK was either first or second for all of you. LA was first for Melissa, was 4th for Jim, 2nd and 3rd for Sara and Mark. So across the gamut there.
I think I one of the top 4 ratings.
Yeah, it's across the board. It really is. I'll do some math and I'll put this in the at the end or in the show notes. But yeah, you guys, other than agreeing that UK was the first or second hardest and Chicago was the easiest or second easiest, everything else was across the board. So that's real interesting. What was your favorite of the 6? Sara, which one was your favorite?
Favorite is probably Europe, but I think mostly because the difficulty of the obstacles and just meeting all new people and just experiencing, the camaraderie of Tough Mudder just in a different country, and it was just kind of amazing. Yeah, so that made it my favorite.
Mark, what was your favorite?
Gosh, well, I concur with Sara. The Brits are just so friendly. I must have run like 30 different Brits and some Germans. I would say Philly, just because it was so meaningful to me. I went out. I didn't think I could hit another 5 miles. I completed 30, and just finishing and just staying fully spent, like I couldn't do anything else. I'd have to be carried off the finish line. That was probably my favorite race.
Philly. Sharkbait, what was your favorite?
Atlanta, just because I absolutely loved the single track, and I kind of gauge when everyone asks what's the toughest. I gauge it based on how I felt at the end. In Atlanta, I was full of energy and happy and excited, and I just loved the terrain. Absolutely loved Atlanta. I love those single track trails. I could run them all day.
Jim, what was your favorite?
It had to be Whistler, and totally for a selfish reason. I did not have a great race. It was tough on me going up the hills and everything else, and I'd done the tougher, but that was no different than the other ones. But I was having kind of a cruddy race, and right at the end, I was coming in, and I think I was coming up to Block Ness. It was up that last hill or whatever, and I hear a voice behind me like, Jim, and it's Ryan, and he's running up, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to get my camera out and take a picture of him. I always take a picture when he goes by. And he's like waving at me. I'm like, what the hell is he doing, right? He's like, Jim, he starts waving his arms. He's like, run, old man, run. I'm like, what are you doing? So I start jogging up the hill. My hips hurting like crazy. I get up and I jog to the thing with him, and he's like, we go through Block Ness, and there's some other guys there and everything else. And he gets out of Block Ness, and I'm like, good job. He's like, no, I want you to run in with me. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, I want you to finish with me. Come on, finish with me. I'm like, dude, my hips hurting. And he's like, come on. And I'm like, screw it, So I start jogging, and we're coming down that hill, so it was all down that kind of slippery hill, and they changed it, and they closed Kong, so we're running in, and then I see that thing, and I realize this is what this guy sees every single time. Like, here's all these people at the end of the thing, and I don't know what it was inside me, but I just got this little burst of energy, and I'm like, screw this, let's just do it. So I take off running, and he's like, oh, you got a little in you still, huh? We're running up the thing, and we go up the hill, and none of it was planned, and I was just so happy to run across the line with him because he'd asked me. And he ran up, and right as we came across the line, he grabbed my hand and lifted it up with his. And I got to tell you, I've had a lot of great times in Tough Mudder, but when that guy did that to me, that made me feel like $1 million. And for one split second, I got to feel what he feels like, every time he runs across that thing. So that was my favorite one.
That's a great story, Jim.
Yeah.
Super cool.
Last thing before
I would have made him throw me on my back, or I would have made him like, you carry me across.
Last thing before we go, as we record this, Team HQ has not announced any toughest mudders in North America yet for 2018. They have announced 2 different toughest mudders in Europe. Toughest Mudder Midlands is on May 12th. That's the same location as the Toughest Mudder UK this year. New for 2018 will be Toughest Mudder Scotland on June 16th. Wilding also said in an interview that they will have a Toughest Mudder in Germany next year, although there is nothing official yet on toughmudder.com. What are your guys' plans for Toughest Mudder 2018? Sharkbait?
My last 2 vacations have been in Europe for Tough Mudders for the last 2 years. I'm going somewhere tropical, so unless they have a, like, Puerto Rico...
Toughest Mudder Bermuda?
Then, yeah. No, I mean, I will see. And you know what? I say it every year. Oh, I'm gonna dial back my race schedule next year, and then it always ends up getting bigger. But no, I'm not planning on going back to Europe unless things change. I would like to. I love it, but I love Europe, but I would like to vacation somewhere else because I do mix this into my like bigger vacation of the year. So,
will you do all the North American races next year?
Maybe. I'll definitely do as many as I can. But I'm not going to do what I did this past year with 3 of them in a month. That was stupid. I mean, I was so broken, and that was not worth all the pain that I went through. So I will try to be a little more strategic next year.
Mark, what are your plans for Toughest Mudder 2018?
So after LA, I actually went up to Will Dean, who was there at the race, and I said, "Hey, you should call these like the 6-pack and offer some kind of like financial incentive. You know, you sign up for all 6 and you get them all for $500 or something." And he kind of looked at me kind of quizzically. It'd be nice if they had a package deal. If there's 6 or 7 or 8 races for next year, I'd be more enthusiastic about that. Being that I just sold my car last week to pay for this season. It was a fun little Porsche. But anyway, I'm game. But it's going to be a long recovery after Worlds, and then January, February, I'll start making my itinerary. But I'm fully hooked on the whole toughest 8-hour races. That's my forte for sure.
Sarah Knight, what are you thinking? Toughest Mudder 2018?
Oh, yeah, plans are not definitely in stone yet, but I want to go back to England for sure. I don't know if I can do all 3 of those over there, but any experience outside the U.S. is going to be awesome. And it will definitely be depending on money as well. So the only reason I was able to push myself through all these races is getting podiums. I mean, it's definitely an expensive thing to do. So just being healthy and rocking at the beginning of the season will help me get all the races in. Go to all the races.
Jim Campbell, Toughest Mudder 2018. What do you think?
Well, I didn't even know. Actually, that's the first I heard about the German one that they had announced, or that they were going to announce that. That kind of surprised me after doing 2 almost a month apart in Scotland and England, which is kind of a crazy thing to have to go back there in a month. But I'll try to make all of them. You know, that's my deal. I'm going to continue to do that. And I would say if I probably miss one of them, you should look for me 6 feet under somewhere at a headstone. So I'll try to make them all.
Jim Campbell, Melissa Sharkbait Dugan, Mark James, Sarah Knight. Any last thoughts on Toughest Mudder?
Best training for Worlds. Go do as many toughest as you can. Best training.
Sarah Knight?
I concur. That was great, yeah.
Mark James?
Yeah, I don't want to rock the boat too much, but the toughest should be a qualifier for Worlds. I mean, you don't want to do Worlds without doing at least an 8-hour event beforehand. And, Will, you know, you were at many of these races with us. You didn't do all 6, but I swear you towed the line. It's always great seeing you and hearing your voice and hearing you promote Tough Mudder like you do. I mean, you're pretty awesome. I just wrote you a blog about you're like the John Tesh, Ryan Atkins of the podcast world, and it's just brilliant to hear you talk, man.
Well, you are very kind, Mark. Thank you. Jim Campbell, you want the last word?
I would say I knew a guy back in 2013 that had a discussion with somebody that said, yeah, we should do some qualifiers for World's Toughest Mudder. And that's all I'm going to say.
Guys,
Yes, Jim always wants the last word.
Sharkbait, you want it instead? Go for it, Melissa.
No. No.
All right, guys,
I'm just glad to see it. I'm glad to see it come to fruition. I think it's been a long time coming.
See?
Well, no, I couldn't get my thought out because you're like, you're like that fucking.
We really do love each other. I swear to God, we really do love each other.
Rah, 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 rah. Here, say it again. Do you have a voiceover for like the teacher on Charlie Brown? Wah, 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 wah. That's Melissa Sharkbait Duncan.
Thank
So, Sarah, see you next weekend.
Yeah, I'll see you then.
See you guys.
All right, I'm back live. So we heard the rankings from the Fantastic Four. I'm going to read them back to you in a minute, and then we're going to assign point values to each ranking. Then we'll add up the points, put them in order, and we'll have a list of the toughest, from toughest to least tough. Sound good? Before I read them back to you, keep this in mind. These 4 people did all 6 courses. They all did the exact same courses, but their opinions vary widely. For example, toughest LA. Sharkbait rated that as number 1, most difficult course. Sara Knight ranked at number 2, Mark James ranked at number 3, and Jim Campbell ranked at number 4. They all ran the exact same course in LA, but they all ranked it differently. Same thing with Philly. Mark ranked at number 2, Jim ranked at number 3, Sharkbait ranked at number 4, and Sara ranked at number 5. They all ran the same course. If these 4 horsemen can't agree, then I promise you and your buddies on Facebook are not going to agree. I'll even bet up at TMHQ they've had the exact same conversation. I can see Eli and Nolan at the company foosball table next to the soft serve machine debating whether the one giant ski hill at Whistler was tougher than the constant hills on the back half of the toughest LA course. Here is Jim Campbell's list with most tough first. Whistler, UK, Philly, LA, Atlanta, Chicago. Sharkbait's list. LA, UK, Whistler, Philly, Chicago, Atlanta. Mark James list. UK, Philly, LA, Whistler, Atlanta, Chicago. And Sara Knight's list. UK, LA, Whistler, Atlanta, Philly, Chicago. Here's how the point system will work. A number 1 ranking, that is a toughest of the toughest ranking, is worth 6 points. A number 6 ranking, or least tough, is worth 1 point. We'll add up the points from all of the 4 seasons, and whichever course gets the most points will win the title of toughest. Make sense?
I don't know what we're talking about.
Good. We'll start at the least tough and work our way up. Chicago was ranked number 6 3 times and number 5 1 time for a total of 5 points. Chicago was the 6th toughest mudder. Atlanta was ranked number 6 1 time, number 5 2 times, and number 4 1 time for a total of 8 points. Atlanta was the 5th toughest mudder. Philly was ranked number 5 1 time, number 4 1 time, number 3 1 time, and number 2 1 time for a total of 14 points. Philly was the 4th toughest mudder. Whistler was ranked number 4 1 time, number 3 2 times, and number 1 1 time for a total of 17 points. Whistler was the 3rd toughest mudder. Los Angeles was ranked number 4 1 time, number 3 1 time, number 2 1 time, and number 1 1 time for a total of 18 points. Los Angeles was the 2nd toughest mudder. UK. The UK was ranked number 2 2 times and number 1 2 times for a total of 22 points. Toughest Mudder UK was the toughest mudder of 2017. So there's your list. The UK with 22 points, LA with 18, Whistler with 17, Philly with 14, Atlanta with 8, and Chicago with 5. What do you think? Did they get it right? Which toughest should have been ranked higher or lower? Let me know at willhicks@gmail.com or in a review on iTunes. Don't forget, the Tough Mudder book is on sale now. It's called It Takes a Tribe. You need to order your copy this week so it counts toward the bestseller lists on the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. You'll enjoy it, I promise. I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot, you guys.